It's one of the driest places on Earth. Yet concealed among the canyons of this harsh desert in the Kingdom of Jordan is a magnificent ancient city, Petra. For over 1,000 years, its location remained hidden, protected by fortress-like cliffs and Bedouin tribes who fiercely guarded its secret. Then, in 1812, a Swiss adventurer disguised as an Arab pilgrim risks his life to search for the legendary city. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt makes his way through the Sieg, a dramatic canyon rising almost 600 feet that twists and turns for nearly a mile. Near its end, the canyon widens to reveal a towering, temple-like facade. It is called the Treasury, or Khazne in Arabic. Built 2,000 years ago, it is a masterpiece of design and engineering. Majestic columns rise from the canyon floor, topped by ornately carved capitals. Statues of mythological figures adorn its facade. A fanciful urn graces its roof, and a towering doorway leads inside to a room with 3 chambers. Here, there is no elaborate carving, just the simple, natural beauty of the stone.
And then we back away and we realize not only is this building unique and fantastic, but it has been carved into the sheer face of living rock.
The treasury is actually a sculpture on a monumental scale. At 80 feet wide and 127 feet tall, it is twice the height of the Mount Rushmore Memorial. As Burckhardt continues through the canyon, he discovers hundreds of magnificently carved facades everywhere, many rivaling the grandeur of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. But there is more. The ruins of an entire city. A 6,000-seat theater carved right out of the sandstone. A main street lined with huge temple-like structures. And even more spectacular monuments carved higher in the mountains. But Burckhardt's rediscovery of the legendary city sparks more questions than answers. Who built Petra, and why? Burckhardt was inspired by stories of a mysterious desert tribe who gained their wealth trading spices and silks among China, India, Egypt, and Rome, and then hid their treasures of gold in the cliffs. Greek and Roman sources provide a name for these people: the Nabateans. An account from the 4th century BCE describes the Nabateans as nomadic tent dwellers. But 3 centuries later, another source describes them as a sophisticated people inhabiting a prosperous city. Around the time of Jesus, Nabatea is a thriving kingdom surrounded by Egypt, Judea, and the vast North Arabian desert. How, in just a few centuries, did a village of tents become a wealthy kingdom? And how, in the middle of a desert, did they build Petra?
The treasury is the most iconic rocking structure in Petra. It's located at the final twist of the winding narrow gorge of the Sieg. The paths walked by tourists today are called wadis, which are dried up floodways on riverbeds. It's obvious that the SIG, the plaza in front of the treasury, and the outer SIG are covered with flood runoffs. This sediment layer must be substantial because it partially as well as completely covers up the doorways of some caves at the outer SIG. The original ground and path could be several meters lower. What might be buried underneath remains a mystery. When you see the treasury, it appears on ground level. You can walk right up to it. But this is not always the case, since the treasury and its plaza looked very different over 2,000 years ago. Originally, the treasury was much higher up and looked even more formidable. There actually is an entire hidden level submerged below centuries of sediments. What could be hiding there for all these years? Let's take a look. Petra is a vast, hilly site, most famous for its magnificent rock-cut facades and massive caves. But this is only part of the mystery of this mind-boggling site. What we see today is just a fraction of what the ancient city really offers. According to Al Muhaysen, who has been excavating in Petra since 1979, archaeologists have only excavated 15% of the site, so an astounding 85% of it is still buried underground. How did the city get buried so deep? It has a lot to do with millennia-long flood runoff accumulation. Petra used to have a highly sophisticated water system to control and collect rainwater and flash floods. The system contained rock-cut channels, dams, cisterns, and water conduits. It not only provided precious water for the locals, but also prevented floods from damaging the rock-hewn city by diverting them. When flash floods were controlled, there would have been no or minimal flood sediments, and thus the stone caves wouldn't have been buried. The significant sediments that built up over time and buried many areas of Petra indicates the water system must have failed a really long time ago. Comparable to our modern utility supplies, a complex and critical system like this ancient one requires regular checkups and maintenance, otherwise it would eventually collapse. For example, Petra's water system used to have a dam at the entrance of the SIG to block floods. Meanwhile, the water was diverted through the channel Wadi Maflan, which is also called the Little SIG. If the dam at the SIG entrance was intact and the Little SIG tunnel was properly maintained, there might not be floods coming down to the SIG and the treasury because the water would have been directed to completely bypass them and straight up facades. So, the thick sediment we see in these areas resulted after the failing of the water system. Just like how our modern cities cannot function without water or electricity, the water system in Petra was essential to the livelihood of its ancient desert inhabitants. As the most important utility line in Petra, it would have been planned and created contemporaneously with the excavation of Petra's large caves. Based on that hypothesis, if we can determine when the water system failed by examining the flood sediments, we could possibly figure out the real age and perhaps the true creators of Petra. Now let's return to the treasury. While admiring this marvelous structure, you might not notice the low walls in front. People usually sit or lean on them. From these bird's-eye views, we can see the walls are surrounding an open area, which is covered with grating. If we zoom in, we can see two lower caves down there, about 5 meters east of the treasury's staircase. These have been claimed to be tombs. Both caves have triangular pediments and column capitals that are in the typical Petra style. Compared to Petra's enormous and beautiful facade, these low-lying tombs are often ignored by visitors. But these caves are by no means small. The one on the right is 5.4 meters high, and the left one is over 6 meters or 20 feet tall, equivalent to a 2-story building. Archaeologists know there are buried chambers in front of the treasury based on a ground-penetrating radar report. These caves were finally excavated in 2003 by Jordanian archaeologists when tourism diminished due to the Iraq War. This should have been major news in the archaeological world, but there is surprisingly little coverage on this excavation. Why almost no one talks about these underground caves? This is beyond me. Here is a plan showing the areas that were excavated. The circles represent the treasury's columns. Even though currently only 2 caves are exposed, there are in fact 2 more similar caves under the treasury, and another lower one on the protruding cliff next to the treasury. So, altogether, 5 rock-cut caves were found along and under the treasury's platform during 2003's excavation. They all have thick layers of flood sediments, even though their doors were blocked off in ancient times. Human bones and Nabatean pottery shards were unearthed in sediment layers. Archaeologists have stated that the oldest cave among the 5 is the one on the far right side of the treasury, which dates back to the 1st century BC. This dating judgment was based on the style of the pottery recovered in the hearth in front of this cave. The hearth was lined with limestone and sandstone blocks. Please bear with me on the details of the limestone because it can be used as evidence for my upcoming argument. Besides these caves, the excavation team also discovered the ancient courtyard pavement made of limestone blocks and higher than the cave entrances. This means the rock-hewn caves existed before the paved limestone courtyard, which was on top of another layer of flood sediment. Entering Petra through the Sig, people would have traversed on some areas where there is similar limestone pavement. Petra is called the Rose City because of its red-colored, iron-rich sandstone. Limestone is not native to the Petra region, and was said to have been imported by the Romans. I think that's a plausible explanation. Petra's signature facades and caves are carved in sandstone. These were the work of the original creators of Petra. They chose to carve their incredible caves in the hard sandstone rather than bringing in less durable limestone. In Petra's Valley, there are some column and block constructions which are completely different from Petra's caves and very close to the Roman-styled buildings. The Nabatean kingdom became a client state of the Roman Empire in the 1st century BC. The block and column structures, such as the Great Temple, were built decades later and used limestone pavers, stairs, and column capitals. It's quite possible that the Romans or Roman-trained masons transported limestone to the site and used it for their projects. So, the foreign material limestone suggests a Roman-era creation, like the paved Sig floor. The excavation in front of the treasury found a limestone-paved courtyard. The oldest pottery and shards in 2003's excavation were found in a limestone-lined hearth. The city of Petra is known to be much older, which is confirmed by the hidden caves under the treasury being lower than the Roman courtyard. Thus, there should have been older sediment layers at the treasury's plaza, which has not been reached in the last excavation. Based on the official 2005 published report, there is an elevation drop around 2.5 meters from the Roman courtyard to the lower cave floor. The steps going down to Cave 62E are made of sandstone blocks and mud mortar. This is not up to the construction standard of the Petra caves, which implies that initially the cave was not underground. The steps were probably a later addition after the sediment buildup covered up the lower portion of the cave. That being said, the original ground floor of the Treasury Plaza could have been at least 8 meters or 26 feet below the current level, since the courtyard is over 6 meters below the Sig and 2.5 meters above the lower cave floor. That means when Romans arrived at Petra about 2,000 years ago, there was already 2.5 meters or over 8 feet of sediment accumulated at the Treasury's Plaza that covered up the bottom of the lower caves. Because the sediment was hard, compact, and very difficult to excavate, instead of removing all the sediment, the Romans only cleared up the paths, added steps to the lower caves for access, leveled existing sediment, and then placed limestone pavers on top. This sediment layer indicates that the Petra's water system must have failed for quite a while, long before the Roman era in Petra. We can reasonably assume that whoever built the water system for the city would have definitely tried to keep it in good working order, because the city dwellers' livelihood depended on it. The thick sediment burying the rock structures is a sign of the demise or exodus of the original builders because they were no longer in Petra to maintain the water system. Mainstream archaeologists state that the ancient Nabateans created Petra along with its water system. The Nabateans lived in Petra since 4th century BC. They continued residing there after the Roman occupation in the 1st century AD. Ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote that the Nabateans lived in the open air, filled cisterns and caves with rainwater in a dry wilderness, where a hostile army could not obtain water. From this account, we can see that the cisterns and Petra's water system were ancient and predate the Roman occupation. If the Nabateans were indeed the creators of Petra, then they should have had the knowledge and means to also maintain Petra's water system. But this is evidently not the case. If the Nabateans knew how to clean and maintain the invaluable water system, then when the Romans came to Petra, there shouldn't have been over 2 meters of sediment in front of the treasury blocking the entrances of the lower caves. This signifies that the Nabateans did not create Petra or its water system. They lived in and enjoyed the site, yes, but they were not the creators. Without regular maintenance, over time, Petra's water system crumbled, dams collapsed, conduits and tunnels clogged, and cisterns filled with sediment and mud. This highly advanced engineering feat no longer diverted floods away from the caves or properly irrigated the site. Floods came down through the Sig, the outer Sig, to the valley and left meters of sediments along the way. This is why the majority of the city is buried underground. Some might think if it takes about 2,000 years to accumulate 6 meters of sediment above the Roman courtyard, that means on average, each meter of sediment takes 333 years to accumulate. Then the 2.5 meters of sediment below the courtyard means 833 years of accumulation. Thus Petra was abandoned over 2,800 years ago, and that's when the water system failed. Not necessarily so. First of all, it might not be a simple math question on the sediment building rate. Secondly, the 2.5 meters or 8 feet of older sediment might not represent the full picture. This thickness is calculated from the courtyard to the lower cave floor. I think it's very possible that the treasury's lower cave floors and openings were higher than the original ground level. Petra's creators were highly sophisticated. They managed to excavate many huge caves in hard sandstone. They established a brilliant and complex water system. These people clearly understood potential flood risks and would have made sure their cave chambers were above the flood zone, unless the caves were designed to be cisterns to collect floodwater. Cisterns are typically underground, with up-top access and stairs going down to the water level. These treasury's lower caves floors are leveled with doors and not suitable to work as cisterns, so they were presumably regular chambers for human usage. If so, it would be sensible for the cave creators to make the cave entrances higher than the ground level in order to protect the caves from possible floods. Like today's houses and buildings, they are always raised to a degree to prevent water from flowing in. Therefore, the real thickness of the sediment layer in front of the treasury should be larger than the elevation differences between the Roman courtyard and the cave floor. Furthermore, Petra has many cave structures located on different altitudes, such as the clusters of caves at the outer sig and the Strait of Facades. The floors of higher caves are natural rock, but this rock layer might also be the ceiling of some lower caves. The treasury stands on natural rock, but now we know there are lower caves right underneath it, and these caves are not on the same level. What if there are structures even further beneath these lower caves, and there is another big step down? Don't forget, in 2003, merely a few selected places got excavated. It's not inconceivable that there may be another hidden level down below.
Most people will recognize the treasury from the climactic scene of Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where Harrison Ford and Sean Connery enter a secret temple to discover the Holy Grail. But despite the great Hollywood story, the treasury and most of Petra's iconic buildings are not temples. They're tombs. The Nabateans left very little writing, but on some of their facades are inscriptions in an Aramaic script, the common language of the Middle East in the time of Jesus. This one, on a facade called Turkmenia, reads in part, "This tomb is sacred. Nothing of all that is inside shall be changed or removed forever." Tomb raiders disregarded notices like this, so human remains and grave goods rarely survive. But body-sized niches leave no doubt these were burial chambers. In all, the cliffs of Petra hold over 800 tombs.
The prominence of these monuments led many of the early explorers to consider the possibility that this might just be a city of the dead, a necropolis. But over the past 200 years, all of the research has actually shown it was a city of the living as well.
Hagra, also known as Median Saleh, is in the desert north of Al Lula in Saudi Arabia, about 300 miles south of Petra. Hagra is an awe-inspiring archaeological site in its own right. Rocky outcrops and giant boulders are the common scene in this area, which is somewhat similar to Petra's landscape. Hagra used to be a major city and a thriving trade hub of the Nabatean kingdom, just like Petra. There are over 100 beautifully carved stone caves that resemble the ones in Petra. This site has been left practically undisturbed for almost 2,000 years, and its well-preserved rock carvings can offer us valuable insights about the Nabateans and their rock-cutting skills. Now, the differences between Hagra and Petra. First of all, most rock-cut caves at Hagra are significantly smaller than the ones in Petra. Instead of carving caves in higher mountains like Petra, the Hagra caves were excavated on smaller boulder-like hills. The largest structure in Hagra is the Long Palace, measures about 22 by 14 meters, while the Petra's largest monument, the monastery, is more than twice the height and size. Most Hagra cave facades look like miniature versions of Petra's. There are a few caves in Hagra that might have grand comparable-sized exteriors, but the interior spaces are usually small with many niches and not remotely close to the big and grand cave chambers in Petra. Also, large Petra caves have giant doors which are proportionally fitting for accompanying the massive interior spaces. The Hagra caves are much smaller with human-sized entrances and much smaller interior spaces. These small caves obviously would demand much less work in creating. Another difference is that many Hagra caves have Nabatean inscriptions on the facades, while Petra caves do not have such inscriptions. The oldest inscription in Hagra dates to 1 BC and the most recent 70 AD. These texts are carved on rock plaques on the facades, front and center above the entry doors. They state that these caves are tombs for important and wealthy people such as the governors. The majority of the Nabatean inscriptions document when the tombs were carved, who and whose families they were created for, and sometimes include the stonemasons' names as well. They contain intimidating phrases to warn off tomb raiders. These inscriptions indicate that the Nabateans carved these Hagra caves within the 1st century AD. As for the much older city Petra, although there is no such inscription or other dating evidence, the archaeologists claim that the important Petra structures, such as the treasury, might have been created around the same period. Looking at close-up shots of the Hagra inscriptions on the cave facades, I noticed countless small chisel marks. Hagra cave facades look smooth from afar, while detailed photos reveal that the flat surfaces were achieved by masons carefully chipping away extra stone and leave small tool marks. This method is still practiced today by traditional masons. These tool marks are consistent with the hand tools used in ancient times. Are there similar small strokes seen at Petra? I haven't been to either Petra or Hagra, so my judgment is based on the detailed photos I can manage to find online. Most Petra caves' exteriors were badly damaged, though some original facade work survived, such as the monastery, the urn tomb, and the treasury. These monuments are not only much bigger in scale, but also show superior carving quality. From photos, they appear to have smooth, almost polished stone facades, curved or round columns, highly accurate details, and very sharp and precise adjoining lines. From this photo of the doorway at the urn tomb, we can see the contrast between the interior with the parallel fine markings and the smoother-looking door frame. The urn tomb already has nice finished interior walls, but the exterior finish seems to be even more advanced. Large facades in Petra are more difficult to create than the smaller ones in Hagra. Some Hagra facades show inferior and misaligned details. In general, Petra caves manifest a much finer and more sophisticated stonework when compared with the small caves with crude tool marks at Hagra. Petra was the first capital of the kingdom. Hagra was built later and imitated the Petra style, but Hagra caves are no match in either the scale or the work standard of the ones in Petra. I want to emphasize that the Hagra caves are the real tombs of Nabatean elites and should represent the true level of the Nabatean craftsmanship. However, why are these later carvings smaller and less sophisticated than the earlier ones? Even if these two sites were created around the same time, per archaeologists' dating suggestions, and both cities were the work of the Nabateans, then how come we see dramatic differences in both the work scale and quality between the two? How did the Nabateans achieve a much higher level of stone carving and finishing work in Petra, while they couldn't do so for the Nabatean elites' resting places in Hagra? That is strange and deserves further investigation. Now, the third difference is that the caves in Hagra and Petra serve different purposes. Hagra's rock-hewn caves were designated as tombs for the established families. There is an ancient town made of small stone blocks and mud bricks in Hagra, and it seems that the ancient Nabatean people lived there. This old town was the second capital of the Nabatean kingdom, and the Hagra rock cave cluster was a necropolis. But Petra is different. I know archaeologists propose that most of the Petra caves were also tombs. The big caves were tombs for kings and royals, and the smaller ones were for the commoners. I beg to differ. The fact is that Petra has a remarkable rock-cut water collection and delivery system. The creators of Petra excavated and built dams, tunnels, cisterns, and water conduits to control and collect annual flash floods. This extensive and ingenious water system proves that the city was created for the living, not the dead. Water had made Petra an oasis in the desert and brought prosperity to the city. People lived, worked, and traded in Petra's caves, much like a modern city. Today, some local Bedouin people still live inside Petra, in caves just slightly off the tourist drag. So Petra and Hegra are indeed different. Archaeologists state that both cities were built by the Nabateans. The terrain and landscape in these two regions are fairly close. If the Nabateans first created the rock-hewn city of Petra, which means they were amazing proficient stonemasons, then why didn't they excavate their second capital, Hegra, with the same advanced method? Why resided a rubble and a mud brick town instead? Moreover, Hegra didn't have a complex water storing and delivery system like the one in Petra. Petra is a well-designed rock city, a mind-binding oasis in the desert. Hegra's rock caves are much smaller and are mostly elite tombs. The masonry quality of Hegra's caves is visibly inferior compared to the grand and cavernous wonders in Petra. Even though these royal tombs should have been the best work that the Nabateans would have achieved. This possibly means the Nabateans probably were not capable of creating the massive caves in Petra. Therefore, Petra might be the work of an earlier and more advanced culture that predated the Nabateans. Imagine the following. An unknown ancient civilization created Petra, a Xanadu, with all the superb monuments and a sophisticated water collection system. They lived here for an extended period of time until some unfortunate events happened and they disappeared. A long time after, other groups of people came to the region, stumbled upon these incredible structures, and made them into their homes. The Nabateans came around the 4th century BC. They loved Petra, made it their capital, and lived there for centuries. The Nabateans admired the majestic rock facades, and when they moved to another city, Hegra, they ordered their tombs to be done in the same adopted style. The treasure looks Hellenistic. Its super-Hellenistic details, such as the Corinthian-like column capitals and intricate reliefs, might have been carved much later than the original structure. It's possible that initially the treasure's facade was similar to the monastery, another huge Iraqi wonder in Petra, with simpler columns and less adornment. It's obvious that these two majestic structures share a lot in common. If the original bottom column capitals of the treasury were the same as the ones at the monastery, then such capitals would have provided enough material for a later reshaping. Also, we see the unaligned beam holes on both sides of the treasury, but we don't see them at the monastery. These holes might be evidence of a Roman-era scaffolding when masons were commissioned to make the treasury's exterior look more Greek or Roman. Another intriguing thing I found is that the palace tomb exterior appears to be painted to represent a Hellenistic architectural detail, the dentils. Dentils are these small rectangular blocks used as decoration under the soffit of a cornice in ancient Greek and Roman buildings. Its precursor might come from when the Greeks were building with wood. This could be another piece of evidence that argues in favor of the stone-cut cave facades in Petra having been modified one by one to be more ornate and Hellenistic. Being the first monument seen at the end of the winding Sig Canyon, the entryway to the Petra city, it's conceivable the treasury was the primary building to be reworked on, while the even larger monastery is far from the city center and located on a high altitude that's able to preserve its authentic Petra style. In summary, the treasury's main structure, its columns, pediments, and all areas that were covered with highly uniformed carving marks, are likely the original stonework, predating the Greek-Roman influence. The treasure's Hellenistic details, such as the Corinthian-like column capitals, the dentils and reliefs, were probably carved later by Roman-era masons with chisels, revealing a visibly cruder finish and masonry work.
New discoveries revealed that the Nabateans had enough water to transform Petra into a desert oasis. Evidence of that water surplus is being found right next to the Great Temple, in a large open terrace. It was named by early explorers as the Marketplace. So when Leanne Bedal began digging here in 1998, that's what she expected.
Because it had been called a marketplace, I came in prepared to excavate a market.
But as she began digging, at 8 feet deep, she discovered waterproof cement.
So we knew that we had something containing water, something deep.
Her team excavated further and discovered a subterranean structure.
We have the southwest corner here, and directly to the north is the northwest corner.
Badal located all four corners to discover overall dimensions of 140 by 80 feet, nearly the size of an Olympic swimming pool. Then, in the middle, she found evidence of a stone platform, and surrounding the sunken structure, channels, likely used for irrigating a lower terrace, where soil samples suggest the area had been cultivated. When she puzzles the evidence together, Badal concludes the marketplace was in fact a huge ornamental pool complex, including an island pavilion and a garden on a terrace below.
If you can imagine below us this large pool of water and then a green garden with date palm trees and flowers, this is something that is for showing off.
Throughout the city center, archaeologists are finding other decorative water features, like fountains and a canal running beside a colonnaded street.
It's really conspicuous consumption of this precious resource, water, in this desert environment.
Petra is in one of the driest places on the planet. If the Great Temple is indeed the heart of a vast engineering system that supplied an entire city with water, where is all that water coming from? One possible source is still used daily by locals. It's called Ain Musa, or the Spring of Moses. Alison Mickle and Cecilia Feldman of Brown University's survey team joined hydroengineer Charles Ortloff to investigate.
In Numbers 20:11, it talks about how the Israelites were wandering in the desert and Moses strikes this rock in anger and water flows forth.
The story of Moses miraculously bringing forth water has been linked in legend to this rock and spring. But it would take an engineering miracle to get this water from Ain Musa to Petra's city center. It's 5 miles away. In the Sikh, the entrance to Petra, the team finds evidence for how the water may have been brought here. Running along the side of the path is a narrow channel which has imprints of what were once enclosed ceramic pipes.
If you look inside of the channel, you can see the actual imprints of ceramic sections that are roughly about 1/3 of a meter long.
At roughly a foot long, it would require tens of thousands of segments to create a 5-mile pipeline from Ain Musa, high in the mountains. And every one of those joints would have the potential to spring a leak. Could the Nabateans possibly have pulled off such a feat of hydroengineering?
Here we have...
At California State University in San Jose, Charles Ortloff and graduate student Cheyenne Mizra Hosseini are trying to figure that out using this 26-foot tank.
Water is extremely precious to the Nabateans. So ancient engineers need to design a pipeline that would be free of leaks.
Their challenge, and Ortloff's, is how to get water to flow through a pipe as quickly and efficiently as possible.
The different angles represent different choices.
One choice seems obvious. Make the slope of the pipe steep. Ortloff sets the slope to 6 degrees and turns on the water. Things start out well. The water is flowing fast, but it fills the pipe too quickly, producing an area of turbulence known as a hydraulic jump, which causes the water flow to slow down.
This is the hydraulic jump right here.
But there's a bigger problem. The pipe is now filled with water, raising the pressure. In the ceramic pipelines, that pressure could create leaks at the joints.
So that design, where we have the steeper slope, is not good.
Okay, closing all the valves.
If you could put the brick on the other side, just gonna slide it over.
Ortloff adjusts the slope of the pipe to 4 degrees.
A little more. Yeah, there we go. Got it.
A small change in the slope, just 2 degrees shallower, has a big impact on the speed of the water.
The big surprise here is that we have only changed the slope by 2 degrees, and yet we have a completely different flow pattern.
The flow is fast. And in this test, the pipe never completely fills with water, which would be good news for Petra's plumbers.
The entire flow has an exposed airspace above the surface, and this will prevent leakage in the system.
With the help of modern-day tools, Ortloff has shown that the best design for delivering water fast and leak-free is a 4-degree slope. And when Ortloff measures the angle of the carved channel in Petra, he makes a remarkable discovery.
If we look at actual field measurements, we're able to see that with their pipeline, the ancient Nabatean engineers had a slope of approximately 4 degrees.
2,000 years ago, Petra's engineers worked out the perfect design for their long-haul pipelines.
They invented scientific principles that were only officially discovered in the West some 2,000 years later.
It is clear that the Nabateans were master hydraulic engineers.
These are the main supplies of water from all of the cisterns, all the dams.
Ortloff has mapped every water feature he and other archaeologists have discovered. 8 springs for fresh drinking water, 36 dams to protect the city from flash floods, over 100 cisterns and reservoirs to collect and hold rainwater, and 125 miles of pipeline to connect many of these features into one integrated water system. From the map and his flume experiments, Ortloff can estimate the total amount of water available to Petra's 30,000 people.
If you sum up all of the water from various sources, that would lead to 8 liters per person per day.
8 liters is about 2 gallons. In a world before showers and washing machines, that's more than enough water to survive on.
The severe curvature of spacetime near the event horizon of a black hole disturbs this quantum foam in ways that you don't see in normal empty space. As neutrinos and antineutrinos and electrons and positrons and other particle-antiparticle pairs get created, sometimes when two of these particles are close to the event horizon, one particle can get sucked into the black hole before the two particles have a chance to annihilate each other. This kind of capture and release by the black hole can happen anywhere in the space around the event horizon, outside it as well as inside it. If the partner is left outside, it will no longer have a partner with which to annihilate, so it will remain and escape from the black hole. This particle will be carrying energy with it. This is what we perceive as Hawking radiation outside the black hole, and this is how a black hole shines. Where does this energy of the escape particle come from? From our perspective outside the black hole, the particle we got is positive, but this means that the black hole got a particle which has negative energy. In other words, the black hole lost energy. This is the same thing as losing mass because of the mass-energy equivalence of Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. So virtual particles are created in space by borrowing energy, but ultimately, so that nothing violates the law of energy conservation, the energy of the shine is really coming from the mass of the black hole. So this is the popular way to think of Hawking radiation, but it has some problems. I think the biggest problem with this is that the radiation from the black holes is not in all different wavelengths, as would be expected with this mechanism. The radiation actually has a wavelength equal to about the size of the black hole. So smaller black holes emit shorter wavelengths or more energy than larger black holes. So a more accurate way to look at this is the following. Now this is still an approximation, but it's probably a closer approximation. In reality, there are no particles, only fields, and this is the crux of the quantum field theory. The actual Hawking calculations consider waves coming in from infinity and being scattered or disrupted because of the black hole event horizon as it was forming. Certain vibrations of waves are deflected by the gravitational field of the black hole as it forms in the past. Some of these get distorted or even absorbed by the event horizon. Some waves don't get deflected at all. Hawking showed that the waves entering the event horizon was disrupted in a way that the wave on the other side carried away energies corresponding to the size of the black hole. Particles with waves as large as the event horizon get lost within the event horizon, so the energy we see are about as large as the event horizon. The quantum fields that have wavelengths the size of the black hole get out with more energy than they came in with, because waves that get absorbed by the black hole have to be negative energy in order for us to see the positive energy in our universe. This corresponds to an energy spectrum analogous to a black body at a certain temperature. So this is why black holes have a temperature, and this is what we perceive as Hawking radiation. But is Hawking radiation real? Can we measure it? Not directly, but Hawking found a formula for the temperature of a black hole. Note that the temperature is proportional to the reciprocal or inverse of the mass. As the black hole evaporates over time, the m in the equation becomes smaller and smaller. This means that the temperature rises as the black hole evaporates. As the black hole evaporates, its mass decreases. So the hottest black holes are the smallest one. This is why they lose energy faster. Now here's the interesting part. As the mass goes to zero, the evaporation rate goes to infinity. So this tells us that near the end of the evaporation process, we would see an explosion of the black hole as the mass is quickly used up. This would be seen as a burst of high-energy photons, or gamma rays.
Okay, so black holes emit radiation, they lose mass. We call that evaporation. Now this, as I said, was irrelevant for an astrophysical black hole, but let's imagine someone let's say someone came and had some way of making a very small black hole, let's say a 1 kilogram black hole. And so someone gives you this 1 kilogram black hole, and you would say, well, 1 kilogram black hole cannot attract me very much. It's probably not a big problem. Okay. However, due to this effect, the 1 kilogram black hole, using the formula E equal to mc squared, will evaporate and will emit an energy which is equal to its mass. And that energy, if you work out what it is just like a 20 megaton nuclear bomb.